to recognize the people that helped make this study occur today. And that is, on the committee for the research study is Sarah Baker, Byron Bridges, Ross McAllister, Drew Sanderford, Paul Hooker, and Jesse Bloom. Let's give them a round of applause. For those of you who have been a member of the Research Council for a couple of years, you'll know we've done a few of these studies now. And for those of you who don't, I'll just review what we've done. The first study we did was multifamily. Then we did an industrial study. And most recently, we did new residential construction. Today, we're going to be presenting retail. And in November, we are scheduled to do, the next study will be office. With that, I'd like to introduce the speaker today, and who is the author of this study, is Mike Nafee. And Mike is a graduate of the University of Arizona, and he started his appraisal work in 1986. He received his MAI designation in 1987, and if anybody knows of appraisal, that is a pretty significant milestone for the appraisal community. In 2011, he was the founding member and formed a company called Velbridge Property Advisors. And Mike was sharing with me that this is the third largest commercial real estate appraisal firm in the nation today. It has 65 offices, it has 200 MAI appraisers, and 650 employees. So, Mike, why don't you come on up? The one thing that Mike shared with me about his early days at the U of A was he ran track, and he was an 800-meter runner. And so, Mike, you've got 30 to 40 minutes here. Let's see if you can sprint.
Retail is one of the most challenging types of development to undertake because it's changing, it's in transition, and it's always in transition. And one of the biggest factors is that you've got to define a critical trade area to be a successful real estate retail development.
This is a brief chart of vacancy and rents. You'll notice that nationally, rents are higher, vacancy is lower. Arizona's coming out of a recession. It's still not fully healed, but it's almost healed, as you can see. And you can also see that Phoenix is a little bit farther behind than everybody else, and that has the biggest influence on the overall state vacancy rate. Tucson is a secondary market. We're not going to have the same affluent retail that Phoenix has or any other major markets. Metro Phoenix is about 4 to 5 times larger, and its development pipeline is also the same, with the exception of recently. It's less because the vacancy rate is significantly higher, and it is recovering significantly faster. Of the vacancy rate, about 3/4 to 80% of the vacancy is within Metro Phoenix. About 13% is within Tucson. This is just a real brief regional mall overview because of the change and transition in regional malls. Phoenix's vacancy rate is 7.2%. You have a lot of malls in the throes of redevelopment, such as Metro Center and Fiesta Mall, and what you really have is tenants are getting tired of paying for cooling their large boulevard halls, and open-air centers are more economically efficient than enclosed centers. Tucson effectively has only 2 regional malls, but in fact, while the vacancy rate is 1.8% and about 100,000 square feet, the availability rate is nearly 5%. Here's the Pima County supply allocation. Let me get rid of the biggest slice of pie right there. That slice of pie is the freestanding retail, freestanding restaurants, sit-down restaurants, fast food restaurants, and a couple of specialty centers. So that is not a significant part of vacancy, by the way. You'll notice that power centers are about under 20%. Neighborhood centers are about 1/4 of the market. Regional malls are less than 10%. The county vacancy allocation by use, now this is very interesting. It's less for power centers, nominal for regional malls, but look at what happens with neighborhood centers. It goes to over 42% of the vacancy. And while the strip retail did not have a large supply component, the vacancy component is over 15%. The neighborhood supply by year, oh, by the way, I looked at doing it two ways. One, A, B, and C type retail, and that was not informative, but by age, it was informative. The neighborhood supply, 32% was built before 1980, 25% the next decade, under 20% the next decade, and you'll notice the declining component of supply for neighborhood centers, which is actually the bread and butter type of retail development in this community. So here are the statistics. Notice that of the vacancy is low and gradually rises, except there's an anomaly for 1981 to 1990. And we're going to see what happened, why that happened when we get to the strip retail. So here's the neighborhood center vacancy by age on a pie chart, and you'll notice there's the largest component is the oldest component in the center of the centers. Now, this is not necessarily a problem. This is an opportunity for redevelopment and repositioning of older, outmoded centers. And by the way, all those centers already have existing infrastructure. Here is the strip retail supply. Notice that before 1980, there's a significant amount. In 1981 to 1990, let's remember this number right here, 21% of the supply was built, and then it goes down to about 10 to 12% in other years, and it has declined even farther this decade. So what we have is a vacancy rate of 13%, and this is more lease up, but then you go to about 10 to 12%, except in 1981 to 1990, and look at what happens in the terms of supply, about 400,000 to 500,000 square feet, but this doubled. And this was due to tax-driven real estate development in the mid-1980s. And what happened was that pro forma is superior to a neighborhood shopping center pro forma in terms of the alleged revenue that gets created. However, what happened was the critical trade area wasn't well defined, and so the vacancy is twice as high as in other components because it was overbuilt. So this is the pie chart that shows that, and you'll notice that the vacancy rate in 1981 to 1990 is 50% higher than the supply component. So now let's look at future demand. So the Pima County vacancy as of Q4 2016 was 3.3 million square feet. We take out vacancy for neighborhoods and strip retail, and it goes down by over 50%. Now let's look at the retail supply of almost 52 million square feet. We again take out the retail supply, and the remaining supply, and the vacancy of just under 1,500,000 square feet, divided by the remaining supply is 4.3%, which is effectively our frictional vacancy. So therefore, if you give a little bit of latitude to vacancy and you take the supply for strip retail and neighborhood centers at 5%, respectively, that's about 300,000 square feet of retail strip supply that's in excess of 5%, and about 700,000 square feet of neighborhood shopping center supply in excess of 5%. So what happens is 55% of the market vacancy is in neighborhood and strip retail centers, but only 33% of the inventory is. So there's your oversupply, and there's the statistical proof that Jason Wong was right, that we are either overbuilt or under-demolished. There is one good thing that comes about from this, and that is when you have an older supply, you have a lower average rental rate, so local tenants are enabled to have a position in the market. That's the one good part of this, but the bad part is that there are storefronts that are really woefully underutilized, and the market can actually do better if this problem is corrected. So this is the part where I became a pessimist initially, because everybody's talking about how retail is going to die. By the way, the conclusion of my study is I'm a cautious optimist, because I think that technology is a tool, not the warhead. So there are 3 channels for retail: physical stores, mobile apps, and e-commerce or websites, along with fulfillment. The problem is everybody's experimenting and nobody's really figured out which does best where and how. So a retail store will generate about 90 cents on the dollar for sales after returns. An e-commerce site will generate about 70 cents on the dollar. But if people prudently use all 3 channels, which is called an omni-channel, and upsell properly, those stores or those chains are producing 107 cents of every dollar that comes in, or of every potential sale. By the way, retail trends. This comes from my conversations with a number of brokers, many of whom are in this audience. And these are the trends that they identified. The fact is, you don't have to lose to Amazon. Best Buy is competing with Amazon by providing additional services. Oak Labs has produced an interactive dressing room, which is actually drawing in shoppers to some high-end stores, and shoppers are engaged in the retail experience in the stores with events, items, and experiential attributes that create additional sales. Here's the context of what I'm talking about. Grant Road and First Avenue is a late 70s, early 80s center. There's about 40,000 square feet of retail space in addition to the anchor. One is a junior anchor, the rest is shops. Those shops are now more service and restaurants and salons. Thornydale and Ina, same thing, mid-80s development. Store, no junior anchor, about 25,000 square feet of shops. There was one apparel shop. They sell uniforms in that shopping center. But today, First and Roger, we have a Fry's, a gas station at the corner, and retail shops, just over 10,000 square feet, medical user, restaurant, salon, and some space that's still being leased up. That's the trend. The market is right-sizing. So, showrooms, fulfillment centers, that's where some of the larger spaces are going to. Footprints have been reduced by a significant amount. PetSmart went from 18,000 to 25,000 to they now have 12,000 plus square foot prototypes, for example. Floor plates are shrinking, but so is the amount of shops. So you can see from the statistical evidence presented earlier, the right sizing is shop spaces that are under 12,000 square feet in a neighborhood shopping center. And by the way, one of the biggest components of the new tenancy are medical. One of the risks in shopping center development is that you have repetitive tenancies. There's a shopping center in Northwest Tucson that has about 3 dental offices in its center, 3 salons in its center, 3 sandwich shops in its center, 3 phone stores in its center. It's hard to get new and unique tenants when you have too much space. So the right sizing is creating some property trends in terms of design. This is, by the way, this is not all inclusive, this is just the highlights. The traditional 60-foot depth, that hasn't changed. They don't go farther than that, they might go a little bit shorter, but they go at 60 feet or less. The other 3, the wide parapet for signage, the higher roof heights, so you can put services and wireless and things like that underneath the ceiling, and less parking because of generational trends. Those are the 3 trends that probably have the biggest design focus at this time in terms of change. So look at this nice plate of signage and I don't call that wall. I call that opportunity for marketing for a retail tenant. But the sign codes need to be flexible enough to let the tenants market, because the tenants are in a very competitive environment. So the better we serve those tenants in terms of helping them market themselves, the fewer boarded up storefronts we're going to have. Here's an older vintage signage, and notice that you do not have the same palette. This is a recently opened set of shops near the Fry's on Valencia Road, and notice the building height. Notice the building height, and notice the wide palette for the signage. This is just the anchor tenant there. Here we have Tucson, and a lot of the information from in this section came from Datos, which prepared an awesome study about the Hispanic market. What we don't have, or we have what's depressed, is the shoppers from south of the border due to the depressed peso. And the super rich are probably going to Phoenix more so than Tucson because there are more opportunities for affluent shoppers. However, what we have is just in our market, just as it sits, a growing Hispanic population that's heading towards being 40% of our population. The average age is 25 years instead of the median age. The median age for them is 25 years compared to 45 years for non-minorities, which provides a long, sustainable consumer base for shopping. Their purchasing power statewide is rising by $2.2 billion per year. This is an exceptional opportunity for retailers. So part of the scope of work was incentivized development. Most of that relates to employment. How are we going to gain on employment? But one of the points that we looked at when we started looking at design trends and right sizing was what are opportunities for the public sector to be involved to enhance the community in terms of retail. And where those opportunities exist is when you have the technology changes that are going on. If you can have flexible zoning that's adaptable to changing trends, you are going to have fewer boarded up storefronts and more vibrant, sustainable retail base. So if the government can get ahead of zoning and have some flexibility for retail developers, it's going to mean that developers and government zoning and officials work together to do so. But that's an opportunity in the marketplace, and many communities are not getting ahead of the curve. That's really where there's a significant amount. So when you have things like Uber and self-driving cars, you don't need as much parking, so you're not going to need as big of a parking pool, and you're going to have and you have the opportunity to create more innovative retail development and design. So where can that go besides in the path of growth? Well, we saw redevelopment of the Elcon Mall, the demalling. It looked really tough, and new tenants went in along with some pads, and that center in the middle of the city is now a vibrant open air center. Theaters are going to the pampered theaters, if you will, where they have dinner and dining, and two of them are going to be in town by the end of this year. Congress Street downtown has a mixed-use component. There are still opportunities. Schenkrose Corner at Speedway and Campbell. Bourne Companies recently purchased the Foothills Center, and in particular, arterial frontage along Grant and Broadway as those roads are reconstructed. And the market participants, they see it coming too. So here's an old big box for redevelopment near Park Place. Here's additional land right next door. Here's an Amphi Plaza. This is the West End. It still exists. Here's the East End. It's now a Walmart neighborhood market with, by the way, grocery and product pickup. There's a delivery window facing Fort Lowell Road. So now, this is the corner of First and Grant that you saw a picture of earlier. But if you look, here are vacant lots, and gradually increasing, and so there are places that are coming up for mixed-use retail and innovative development within the middle of the city that's already has the infrastructure all budgeted and or created. Here's a former Fry's. It was replaced by the one on Valencia Road. The Fry's is vacant, so that's another redevelopment opportunity. Here's Arizona Pavilions. So notice the parking lot. Here's Walmart. Here's a full parking lot. And then here's an empty parking lot. So the stores are designed to have a parking lot that's full up to 5 days out of the year. It's a real big waste of infrastructure at this point in time, especially with changing trends, especially generationally. So now let's look at where we're going in terms of path of growth. The 5-year population growth from STDB is just under 35,000. Per capita sales, I rounded up to 13,000. The retail sales increase is almost $450 million. If you divide that by $300 per square foot of retail sales, equals a retail demand of almost 1.5 million square feet over 5 years, or 300,000 square feet per year. The allocation was based upon, I looked back in history, and then I made some adjustments. The power centers, community centers, they're struggling because of the competition with Amazon and other fulfillment. So some of that space would likely go from power centers and community centers to neighborhood centers. Arterial redevelopment and unanchored shops and food service, that's where you get some great infill, and those are additional opportunities in particular. Pending developments, notice how Fry's is extremely active. One thing, when I talked about right sizing, a lot of stores are going down in size. Fry's is going up in size because they've identified their consumers want a broader offering of product. So their minimum stores are now 100,000 square feet. So what you have with these first 5 stores is probably close to 2 to 3 years supply of retail space that's coming online. The center at Irvington and I-19 that Bourne Partners is developing, this is a very interesting case. Notice the stores, the junior anchors and the anchor tenants, many of them face I-19. Bourne has created a constellation of paths along the arterial and the freeway to basically create a significant income stream, probably from either sales or from ground leases of freestanding paths. So that's an interesting and somewhat novel change that we haven't seen in the marketplace, and we haven't even seen that they haven't even seen that in Phoenix. Most of the centers look like the one across the street. So this, based upon the housing study that was done about a half a year ago, this is where the neighborhood centers are forecast to go. And most of them are already spoken for the next couple of years. Power centers, not so much. The runway for a power center is going to be longer because of the transitional retail aspects of the marketplace. So let's look at feasibility here. In the report, I also did a junior anchor analysis, but this is for small shops. The case study is an actual case done about 2 years ago. The brokers that I interviewed were remarkably consistent, except their rents were a little bit higher. But in fact, another small retail center is getting rents at $32 per square foot. So the brokers are consistent, or the broker developers are consistent with what's going on in the market. So you have rents at $27 to $30 on average, add back expenses, take off 6% for vacancy, and then you have net operating income of $25 to $28. Capitalizing that by 7 to 7.5% equals a value of $330 to $400 per square foot. So is that feasible? If the land is $40 to $80, the building costs are $130 to $155 per square foot, and the indirect costs are $40 per square foot, lease-up costs at $15 per square foot. The total costs are $225 to $290 per square foot, yielding a profit on sale of about $110 per square foot. There's one risk caveat in this, and that is In terms of property taxes, if you are in a shopping center, eventually you get the benefit of the shopping center property tax rules. If you are not in a shopping center, the expenses that are set forth herein can be probably $2 to $3 per square foot higher. Here's the Tucson retail market. If you look at the history, cap rates were about in the 7.5 range, 7 to 8% range before the recession. They increased about 1.5% to about 8 to 8.5%, and then gradually declined starting in 2013 to 6 to 6.5%. Now there's an undersupply of available product for investors nationally, and even though there's been some more product coming online, there's still more investors than there are deals. But that supports the cap rate that I used in that analysis. So in conclusion, we have about 1 million square feet of oversupply. It can be taken out, and it can be readapted, and it can be reused. It's an opportunity. It's not just a problem. It's an opportunity, and it holds down rents. The technology is creating continued transition and continued change in the retail market. The amount of shop spaces and floor plates are generally shrinking, with a couple of exceptions. The younger Hispanic market is a huge opportunity for retailers. Redevelopment is ongoing and accepted in the Tucson market. Arterial frontage is one of the biggest opportunities that we're going to have going down the road. Path of growth, 300,000 square feet, and most of it will be in neighborhood retail and redevelopment along arterials. Thank you very much. I'd like to also thank the people that helped me, gave me advice, and let me talk to them for about a half an hour to an hour apiece. Thank you.
So first thing I'd like to say is the actual retail study report will be done in about a week or two and will be uploaded to our site when our site is safe again. So that's in process. So let's take a few minutes before we go to the panel discussions and do some Q&A with Mike. Mike, you had some interesting things up there. I think the higher walls showing the signage. You talked about parking, building too many parking places for only 4 to 5 days. And the thing that came to my mind is like at Lowe's on Ina Road, they're putting in or at Target they're putting in a Chick-fil-A in the Target parking lot. So that's probably, and I drove down the street and I looked, and Lowe's is kind of the same situation. It's this huge parking lot. It's probably way overparked, and there's a lot of that within the city. Again, infrastructure's there. You can build additional pads, additional retail without costing the community a whole lot. Is there anything else you want to comment on that?
Well, this is an opportunity for the owners of the property and the tenants, to a degree, if they're not the owners, to basically better utilize their existing infrastructure and actually create a higher return for their property. But the other thing is, the government needs to be accommodating of these changes and the generational trends. Millennials are basically driving, 60% of them are driving cars. The other 40% don't care.
So if I were a smart investor or developer, which I'm not, I would be looking at those big parking lots and finding who the owner was and then seeing what tenants I could get to go there and try and make a deal. But question?
Mike talked about zoning flexibility in that section. Locally, how is the city of Tucson looking at this? Are they responsive? Do we have, how much government is here today to hear some of this?
I saw one person from the town of Sahuarita here. That's what I think I heard. Is that correct? And sorry to call you out. and he's with economic development, so go figure. This is where the development community needs to engage the planning and zoning and elected officials to say, hey, do you want boarded storefronts that create minimal sales tax revenue, or do you want wow factor retail that creates lots of sales revenue and it really helps maintain our streets and maintain our schools, et cetera, et cetera. So it's an opportunity, but that's why I brought this up. It hasn't been done yet.
So I'm Amber Smith, the CEO of Metropolitan Fremont Alliance, and we are your commercial real estate advocates. And the window of opportunity is right now. As Michael mentioned, the City of Tucson is going through a whole signing code revamp. And it is critical that the commercial brokers show up at these hearings, show up at our meetings when we're having an internal, and letting my organization know what you want. We're creating very specific design standards. And one of the fights that we even had with the city was the definition of parapet, which played right into some of your conversation about look at all that parapet wall. And now is your chance. And on the parking part, we right now are going to be doing a comparison across the jurisdictions, looking at exactly that, is how overparked are we jurisdiction by jurisdiction. So if you want to get involved, this is what MPA does. So become a member, participate in our meetings, and show up at the Be Heard meetings at council if you really want to implement change, because it's really going to make a difference to your pocket.
Mike, you made mention of a shopping center tax rules, and if you're not in a shopping center, taxes could be $1 or $2 higher per foot.
Correct.
Can you expound on that? What is the shopping center tax rule?
The state of Arizona allows shopping centers to be treated preferentially compared to other retail. And so you are allowed to do is elect using either the cost approach or which has favorable depreciation rules, or the building residual income approach, which, so I just said the cap rate's about 7 to 7.5%. So how would you like to own a shopping center and go into the assessor, the State Board of Equalization, and say, yes, here's my formula. I just used a 15% cap rate to tell you what my shopping center is worth for property tax purposes. You get to do that for a shopping center. You need to have a qualifying shopping center. It needs to have at least 3 tenants. One of the tenants needs to be at least 10,000 square feet. And there's one other rule that I, since I don't do it every day, there's one other criteria. But 10-year lease. What? I'm sorry. Pardon me. 10-year lease. Okay.
15,000 square feet.
Oh, it's 15,000 square feet now? It was 10,000 at one point. Okay, thank you. So that preferential treatment creates probably a $1 to $3 per square foot value differential.
Could you explain a little bit more about, I thought it was interesting, Bourne's development on Irvington and I-19, how they're putting pads on the frontage of I-19. Is that just a reversal in trend that pads are becoming more the destinations, and so they're using pads to lure people in the big box, or did you, can you just explain a little bit more about that?
Instead of stealing any thunder, Alan Tanner was really nice to me, okay? And I'm going to let Alan, I'd like to have Alan answer that question instead of me, because one other thing, that picture was probably, is that the 10th generation or the 20th generation, Alan? Okay, the 60th generation. So what you have is, you might as well ask the guy that knows the most.
The economics for building those big boxes and the rents that they can support has compressed pretty significantly. So the way to make a larger site like that feasible is to generate higher rents in the smaller shop space and pad areas. So that's the way to balance the site a little bit. And those shop space tenants and pad tenants really need the visibility and the identification to the major arterials to be able to cater to their customer base. So if you can get the anchors to go not in the back, but support them, then you should have a formula that will help increase the overall success of the development. And in our case, and we may touch a little bit more about it, you have such a successful center across the street, in DDR's project. That's 1.2 million square feet, and it's an absolute major driver to that whole trade area. And so the customer's already coming to that trade area, so how do we help expand the opportunity for those smaller shops and pad users?
I guess one last thing I wanted to mention, you had a lot of good slides go up with those different pie charts, and I wanted to see if I could articulate this and correct me. If we look at the supply and the vacancy and as what was built, if you take out strip retail that was built before 90, the vacancy factor goes way down. Is that a safe?
It goes way down for strip retail, but the vacancy factor is still significant because of the neighborhood vacancy is basically a significant part of, is actually probably twice what the strip retail vacancy is. So the older older neighborhood centers have a bigger component, but both of them together, they're basically 2/3 of the vacancy.
My question, Mike, is one of the trends where we're seeing reduced focus on, on the anchors, whether it's even the grocery store, et cetera. And of course, the old strip centers. Is there something in between now that's emerging that's independent, despite pad development, without an anchor behind, and they're not connected, so they're all freestanding? It might be service, medical, or other related, et cetera.
Well, first of all, I believe that in order to draw traffic, you're going to have, let's just use Bourne's development. If you're going to draw development, look at what's across the street. That's what Alan said. There's a lot of anchors. Those paths will likely work, but part of the reason they will work is because of all of the anchor draws and the 1.2 million square feet that's already in the area driving traffic to that intersection. So to say, well, so now, can you do that maybe along an existing thoroughfare like Grant or Broadway as it's reconstructed? Speedway is a classic example of that. Certainly. However, if you're going to have a major draw, you're going to need national credit anchors, and that's going to help. The pads are it's all complementary. It's not just one or just the other. It takes both. I hope did I answer your question?
Yeah, it's a broad discussion.
Okay. All right, well, let's transition to the panel discussion.
Thank you all again, and thanks to the committee. And Paul, thank you very much. Paul and I had a number of discussions, and Paul, I really appreciated your input and your help and your support. Thank you.